Joining me right now is North Dakota Senator, a member of the Senate Armed Services and Budget Committees, Kevin Cramer. Senator, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate your time. Over the last few nights, we've been seeing significantly less violence relative to day one. Protesters taking to the streets peacefully. What's your perspective on how these demonstrations have changed and where we are in all of this today?
Well, thanks, Maria, for the opportunity to be with you. You know, my perspective is that it could be any number of things. One, it might just be a little bit of fatigue. You know, one can only protest for so long before you have to hopefully get back to work someplace. And the other thing I think is that the president has made a difference, and I know some people would like to see him take a more a softer approach to a lot of this, but his first priority has been and is and continues to be the safety and security of the American people, and he's used some pretty tough rhetoric and warned some governors to step it up, or he would, and I think that has also been helpful. You know, you can't just allow lawlessness as some sort of an appropriate response to you know, to a vicious killing of an innocent man by police officers.
What's your take on getting the military involved? Your colleague, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, has an op-ed in the New York Times calling for military response to the George Floyd protests. In a New York Times op-ed, the senator writes this, in part, outnumbered police officers encumbered by feckless politicians bore the brunt of the violence. It is past time to support local law enforcement with federal authority. These rioters, if not subdued, not only will destroy the livelihoods of law-abiding citizens, but will also take more innocent lives. His call to bring in the troops facing some fierce criticism. What's your take on this, Senator?
Well, I think the first priority, once you've employed all of the law enforcement you can at the local and state levels, is the National Guard. And to that end, some governors have done that. Others governors have been reluctant to do that. I think that's what the president's admonition to the governors the other day was. I think it was an appropriate one, saying that if you don't step it up, I will, by employing the Insurrection Act. And I think all of that was appropriate. And I think Senator Cotton certainly is taking a strong position there. My hope would be, however, that we could avoid using active military personnel. Just as Secretary Esper said, it should be a last resort, not a first resort, and we're not there yet. The good news is that I think that the president's statement about that, the talk of using the military, is exactly the type of message that causes some pause if you're if you're considering looting another store tonight. And so I think it's all working, if you will, without having to carry out the threat.
I see. Well, by the way, Senator Cotton goes through all of the other times, for instance, in the 1950s and 60s, right, when military was brought in to actually subdue rioters and mobs that prevented progress. Let me ask you, switch gears and ask you about the economic recovery, aid for Americans. The Senate passed legislation to give small business more flexibility in spending coronavirus aid. This bill allows small business to repay their loans in 24 weeks instead of the original 8-week deadline. I've spoken with many small business owners about this issue, and they've been advocating for this extension since the start. So I think this is a big deal that you're doing this. The bill now heads to the president's desk for signature. What are you expecting here in terms of signage going into law and how its effect will impact small business and the reopening?
Sure. First of all, Maria, I think it's going to provide tremendous relief to small businesses and their lenders, frankly, because this has been a moving target, as we know. It's come under some criticism for the change of rules from time to time. However, the rules have been adapted according to how the PPP has been rolled out, and I think that's entirely appropriate. This flexibility, though, is really important to a lot of our small businesses. The going from 8 weeks to 24 weeks is especially important as we're heading into the summer season. The 8 weeks is about to run out. Obviously, a lot of them haven't been able to spend it. The extension of the loan payback is obviously also important because it was keeping a lot of small businesses who need the money from actually borrowing the money because they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to pay it back. And I think probably the biggest piece is allowing them to use more of the loan for necessary expenses like rent or mortgage or utilities, and still be able to get 100% forgiven was really critical. I thought an important move.
It was definitely critical.
Honored to do it. Yep.
I agree with you. A lot of small businesses said the same thing to me, that they needed more wiggle room on all of this. All right, real quick, you're from North Dakota, an oil state. Crude, of course, has come back, all the way back. It's pulling back this morning. It's down 1.5%. But you're talking about you're talking about a complete comeback from the lows just a couple of months ago. What kind of an impact has this had on North Dakota? Just this move in oil.
Again, it provides optimism, and we are getting more optimistic comments from some of our producers, our mid-sized and smaller producers. They're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, the OPEC Plus meeting that we're anticipating, where certainly Saudi Arabia and Russia are looking at extending their recent cuts, would be helpful. However, I'm most hopeful about the fact that every time I get on an airplane these days, there are more people on it. There are more flights being added back into the schedules, and that's really the demand is what we need back more than anything. In the meantime, a little supply control would be helpful, but the real hope is in growing demand with a growing economy.
Yeah, and I guess that's what the price of oil is, a real indicator in terms of what's happening across the world with demand.
Exactly.
Senator, it's good to see you this morning, sir.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Thanks,
Senator
Maria.
Kevin Cramer joining us there.